Sometimes the people the world calls foolish are the only ones brave enough to leave the door open. The wind howled across Hollow Creek like a living thing, bending towering pines until they groaned against the darkness. Sheets of rain slammed into the weathered cabin tucked against the edge of Blackbriar Forest, where Emma Whitaker tightened another board across her kitchen window and silently prayed the old walls would survive another hour. The local weather station had warned that the hurricane would bring winds exceeding 70 miles per hour before midnight, but long before the first emergency alert reached anyone's phone, the forest had already known. The birds had disappeared. The deer had vanished into the hills. Even the insects had gone quiet. Emma had learned years ago that the woods always heard danger before people did. She was only 24, yet loneliness had made her seem older. Ever since her own pack quietly pushed her aside for being an Omega who lacked strength they admired, she had lived alone in the small cabin left behind by her grandmother. Most people in town barely acknowledged her anymore. They waved politely at the grocery store, avoided conversation, and whispered that kindness was a weakness destined to invite disaster. Emma never argued. She simply smiled, paid for her groceries, and returned to the only place that had never judged her. Outside, another crash echoed through the valley as an ancient oak surrendered to the storm. The lights flickered once, then twice, before the entire cabin fell into darkness. Only the orange glow from the fireplace remained, painting long shadows across the wooden floor. Emma lit 3 candles, wrapped herself in an old wool sweater, and checked the latch on the front door one last time. The air smelled of rain, pine, and cold earth drifting through tiny cracks in the walls. She whispered to herself that everything would be fine, although her heartbeat insisted otherwise. Then she heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. At first she thought a loose branch had found the porch. The sound came again, slower this time, followed by the faintest whine almost swallowed by the storm. Emma froze. Nobody would be outside in weather like this. She reached for the lantern instead of the fireplace poker, surprising even herself. Another scrape. Another soft cry. Her hand rested on the doorknob as doubt fought compassion inside her chest. Every warning she'd ever heard rushed through her mind. Never open your door during a storm. Never trust sounds from the forest after dark. Never invite unknown creatures into your home. But the frightened cry returned, weaker than before, carrying none of the menace people always imagined. Emma slowly pulled the door open just enough to look outside, and her breath caught. Standing on the soaked porch beneath the driving rain were 11 wolves, their thick coats drenched, their exhausted eyes reflecting the lantern's trembling light. None growled. None bared their teeth. They simply stood together in silence, shivering against the relentless wind, as though they had traveled miles searching for the one place where someone might still choose mercy over fear. Emma stared at them, unaware that among those 11 weary strangers stood a king whose true identity would change her life forever. Emma did not remember deciding to step aside. Her body simply moved before fear could argue with compassion. One by one, the wolves crossed the threshold with careful, measured steps, leaving pools of rainwater across the worn wooden floor. They did not behave like wild predators. They behaved like exhausted travelers who had reached the last safe place left in the world. The smallest of the group limped toward the fireplace before curling into a tight ball beside the warmth. Another lowered its head as if thanking her without words. Emma quietly shut the door against the roaring wind and leaned her back against it for a moment, listening as the storm continued to rage outside. The cabin suddenly felt smaller than ever, yet strangely calmer. She counted them again. 11. Exactly 11 wolves filled the little living room. Most carried leaves tangled in their soaked fur, and several looked painfully tired after what must have been a long journey through the hurricane. One of them, however, immediately drew her attention. He was the largest by far. His thick black coat shimmered with silver whenever the firelight reached it, and although he stood perfectly still near the doorway, every other wolf seemed to watch him before making the smallest movement. It was almost as though they waited for silent permission. Emma frowned at the unusual behavior, but pushed the thought aside. Animals formed their own bonds. She had seen enough strays over the years to know every group had an unspoken leader. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying every clean towel she owned. Kneeling beside the nearest wolf, She gently dried the rain from its face and shoulders. The animal remained perfectly still, its golden eyes never leaving hers. One after another, she repeated the quiet routine until damp towels covered nearly every chair in the cabin. The black wolf never approached her. Instead, he watched from the shadows near the front door, his silver eyes calm, observant, almost thoughtful. Emma finally smiled toward him. "You are keeping watch, are not you?" she whispered. "That is all right. You can take your time." The wolf blinked once, but did not move. The fire crackled softly while thunder rolled across the mountains. Emma filled several large bowls with fresh water and placed them around the room. None of the wolves rushed forward. Again, they waited. Only after the black wolf lowered his head slightly did the others begin drinking quietly. Emma paused. It happened so naturally that she almost questioned whether she had imagined it. Outside, another emergency alert echoed faintly from her forgotten phone charging on the kitchen counter, warning residents to remain indoors because flooding had washed out 2 highways leading into Hollow Creek. Help would not arrive until morning, if it arrived at all. She looked around the cabin and laughed softly to herself. "Well," she murmured, "it looks like we are all stranded together tonight." For the first time since the storm began, the black wolf slowly stepped away from the doorway. He stopped only a few feet from the fireplace, where the orange light revealed pale scars hidden beneath his thick fur and eyes unlike any wolf Emma had ever seen. They carried neither fear nor anger. They carried patience, quiet strength, and an ancient sadness that made her heart ache without understanding why. Unaware of the secret sitting only steps away, Emma reached for one last blanket and carefully spread it across the floor near the fire, hoping that even the proudest among her unexpected guests might finally allow himself to rest. The hurricane showed no sign of mercy as midnight settled over the valley. Rain hammered the roof with steady determination, and every powerful gust made the old cabin creak as though it were speaking to the storm. Emma added another log to the fireplace, watching sparks drift upward while warmth slowly spread through the room. The wolves had begun to relax. A few slept with their noses tucked beneath their tails. Others remained awake, their ears twitching whenever thunder rolled across the mountains. The strange peace inside the cabin felt almost impossible compared to the chaos beyond the walls. Emma disappeared into the small pantry and frowned at the shelves. There was not much left. A loaf of homemade bread, a few cans of vegetable soup, dried herbs, oatmeal, and several packages of smoked turkey she had planned to stretch through the rest of the week. She sighed softly before smiling to herself. Food could always be replaced. Hungry guests could not wait. She heated water on the old cast-iron stove and prepared simple broth using everything she could spare, allowing the rich scent to fill the cabin. When she carried the bowls into the living room, the wolves quietly lifted their heads. Again, none of them moved first. Their attention settled on the large black wolf standing beside the fireplace. He looked toward the food, then slowly turned his silver eyes toward the others. Only then did the younger wolves cautiously step forward. Emma noticed the pattern again. This was no ordinary pack behavior. Even the oldest among them treated the black wolf with complete trust. Still, she refused to let her imagination run wild. Perhaps he had simply protected them through the storm. That alone could earn loyalty. As the wolves ate, Emma noticed one younger gray wolf struggling to put weight on its front leg. She approached slowly, speaking in the same calm voice her grandmother had always used around frightened animals. "You do not have to be afraid. I only want to help." The young wolf hesitated before extending the injured paw. Emma carefully examined it beneath the lantern light. A long thorn had lodged between the pads. She gently removed it, cleaned the small wound with warm water, and wrapped it with a strip torn from an old cotton towel. The wolf looked at her with grateful amber eyes before nudging her hand with surprising gentleness. A quiet smile crossed Emma's face. "There, that should feel much better by morning." Across the room, the black wolf never looked away from her. His expression remained unreadable, yet something had changed in his gaze. The careful distance he had maintained since entering the cabin seemed to soften ever so slightly. Instead of suspicion, there was quiet curiosity. Instead of guarded calculation, there was respect. Outside, the wind suddenly shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of engines struggling somewhere beyond the forest road. Emma walked to the frosted window and peered into the darkness. but visibility stretched no farther than a few yards beyond the porch. Whoever was outside would not be traveling for pleasure on a night like this. A faint uneasiness settled over her heart. She locked the front door once more, pulled the curtains closed, and returned to the fire without another word. The wolves seemed to notice the distant sound as well. Every head lifted at once. Every ear turned toward the forest. Yet none appeared frightened. They appeared alert, disciplined, and ready, as though they had spent their entire lives preparing for moments exactly like this. Emma wrapped another blanket around her shoulders and settled into the rocking chair near the fireplace. She believed she was protecting 11 lost wolves from the storm. She never imagined that before sunrise, the greatest danger would come wearing the face of ordinary men rather than the fury of the hurricane. Emma must have drifted asleep for only a few minutes before a sharp burst of barking shattered the quiet rhythm of the cabin. She opened her eyes to find every wolf standing perfectly still, their attention fixed on the front door. The fire continued to burn steadily, but the peaceful atmosphere had vanished. The black wolf had moved silently between Emma and the entrance, his broad shoulders blocking the narrow hallway, without making a single threatening sound. He simply watched the door as though he already knew someone was coming. Then came 3 heavy knocks. They were slow, deliberate, and confident. Emma rose from the rocking chair, pulling her sweater tightly around herself. Another knock echoed through the cabin, followed by a familiar voice muffled by the storm. "Emma, it is Sheriff Daniel Harper. Open the door." Relief briefly crossed her face. She hurried toward the entrance, but before her hand reached the lock, the black wolf stepped in front of her. His silver eyes met hers, calm yet intensely focused. He did not growl or bare his teeth. Instead, he gently lowered his head, almost as if asking her to wait. Emma hesitated. The wolf's unusual behavior stirred an uncomfortable feeling deep inside her. Sheriff Harper had always treated her kindly enough, but something about the timing felt wrong. Nobody should have been driving through flooded roads in the middle of a hurricane. The knocking came again, louder this time. "Emma, we know you are inside. We are checking every home near the forest. There are reports of dangerous wolves in the area." Emma looked toward the window where rain still pounded against the glass. She slowly pulled one curtain aside, just enough to see outside. 3 pickup trucks sat crookedly across her yard, their headlights cutting through the rain. Several men stood beside them wearing heavy rain jackets and carrying powerful flashlights. Sheriff Harper was there, but so were a handful of local volunteers she recognized from town. Their lights swept across the trees surrounding the cabin, searching carefully. Emma opened the door only a few inches, keeping the safety chain in place. Cold wind rushed inside immediately. "Sheriff, what is happening?" she asked. Daniel removed his hat, water streaming from its brim. "A wildlife officer called us an hour ago. They tracked a large wolf pack heading this direction before the roads washed out. We believe they may be hiding somewhere nearby. They could be frightened after the storm." Emma glanced over her shoulder. 11 silent wolves stood just beyond the reach of the lantern light. Not one made a sound. Not one stepped forward. Daniel continued speaking. "If you have seen anything unusual, you need to tell us. We only want to make sure everyone stays safe until daylight." Emma felt her heart beating faster. She had known these animals for only a few hours, yet every instinct told her they were not the danger standing outside her home. She remembered the younger gray wolf offering its injured paw without fear. She remembered the quiet patience in the black wolf's silver eyes. They had trusted her the moment she opened the door. She could not betray that trust now. Emma slowly shook her head. "I have not seen anything except the storm," she answered honestly enough. Daniel studied her face for a long moment before offering a tired smile. "All right, keep your doors locked until morning." As the trucks prepared to leave, the black wolf remained beside Emma without making a sound, his gaze fixed beyond the rain toward the disappearing headlights. Yet the moment the engines faded into the darkness, he lifted his head slightly, listening to something far beyond human hearing, and for the first time since entering the cabin, genuine concern flickered across his ancient silver eyes. The storm finally began to lose its fury sometime after 3 o'clock in the morning, but an uneasy silence settled over the forest that felt far more unsettling than the roaring wind had ever been. Emma had always believed that nature carried its own language. Rain spoke openly. Thunder warned honestly. Silence, however, often hid the things no one wanted discovered. She stirred the fading fire, adding another split log before wrapping her hands around a mug of hot tea. The cabin was warm now, filled with the steady breathing of her unexpected guests. Most of the wolves rested peacefully, recovering from whatever desperate journey had brought them through the hurricane. Only the great black wolf remained awake. He stood beside the window, staring into the darkness beyond the glass with complete concentration. Emma quietly joined him. "You hear something, do not you?" she whispered. The wolf did not turn toward her. His ears shifted slightly, as though tracking sounds far beyond ordinary hearing. Emma followed his gaze, but saw nothing except dripping branches swaying beneath a sky that was slowly clearing. Then she noticed fresh tire tracks cutting across the muddy road leading toward the deeper forest. The sheriff and his volunteers had driven back toward town. Someone else had continued in the opposite direction. Her stomach tightened. Whoever those people were, they had not been searching for stranded families. They had been following something. The black wolf suddenly exhaled, almost like a weary sigh, before lowering himself onto the blanket Emma had placed beside the fireplace hours earlier. It was the first time he had allowed himself to rest. His breathing had become noticeably heavier, and as he shifted beneath the firelight, Emma finally saw what his soaked fur had hidden all night. Along his right shoulder, the thick black coat was matted together around a deep scrape that had clearly reopened during the long journey through the storm. It was not life-threatening, but it had never been properly cleaned. "Oh," Emma whispered softly, kneeling beside him. "You have been carrying that all this time." The wolf watched her carefully, but made no effort to move away. She disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a small first aid box, warm water, clean cloths, and the herbal salve her grandmother had taught her to make every spring. The familiar scent of pine resin, lavender, and wild honey filled the room as she carefully cleaned away the dried mud surrounding the wound. Every movement remained slow and gentle. She spoke quietly the entire time, more to comfort him than herself. "You must have protected the others," she murmured. "Leaders always forget to take care of themselves." For just a moment, something remarkable happened. The black wolf closed his eyes, not from weakness, but from trust. Emma felt it immediately. The tension that had surrounded him since he entered the cabin seemed to melt away beneath her careful hands. Around the room, the other wolves watched silently. None interrupted. None approached. It was almost as though they understood that something important was unfolding between the quiet Omega and the mysterious guardian they followed without question. As Emma finished applying the herbal salve, she rested her hand lightly against the thick fur near his shoulder. A strange warmth spread beneath her fingertips, gentle as sunlight after winter. She blinked in surprise, wondering whether it came from the fire or simply from her imagination. The black wolf slowly opened his silver eyes and looked directly into hers. Neither of them moved. Outside, hidden beyond the trees, another pair of headlights quietly appeared at the edge of the forest road before their engines fell silent, and unseen eyes began watching the lonely cabin once again. The first pale light of dawn crept through the rain-soaked clouds, turning the forest into a world of silver mist and dripping branches. The hurricane had passed, yet the air remained heavy with the strange stillness that always followed great storms. Emma quietly opened the kitchen window a few inches, breathing in the cool scent of wet pine and fresh earth. Somewhere in the distance, a creek rushed louder than usual after the night of relentless rain. She almost convinced herself everything would soon return to normal. Then the black wolf lifted his head. Every muscle in his body became perfectly still, his silver eyes fixed on the forest beyond the cabin with unwavering focus. Within seconds, the other 10 wolves reacted the same way. Some rose to their feet. Others moved silently toward the windows. Not one made a sound. Emma watched the sudden change with growing concern. "What is it?" she whispered, although she knew no answer would come. A faint crack echoed through the trees. Then another. Branches shifted, not from the wind this time, but from careful footsteps. Emma instinctively stepped away from the window and lowered the curtain. Whoever remained outside had moved closer. The headlights she had noticed earlier were gone, but someone was still there. A slow knock interrupted the silence. Unlike Sheriff Harper's steady voice during the night, this knock carried no urgency. It carried patience, confidence. Emma did not move toward the door. Neither did the wolves. Another knock followed, Then a calm voice called from outside. "Miss Whitaker, we know you are awake. We would appreciate a brief conversation." Emma frowned. She did not recognize the voice. It sounded polite, almost friendly, but something about its measured tone unsettled her. She glanced toward the black wolf. He remained between her and the entrance exactly as he had during the night. His ears tilted forward, and his gaze never left the door. "Who is it?" Emma finally asked without unlocking anything. The man answered immediately. "My name is Victor Hayes. My colleagues and I are conducting a wildlife recovery operation after the hurricane. We believe several valuable wolves entered this area. We only wish to escort them somewhere safe." Emma felt her pulse quicken. Valuable wolves. It was an unusual choice of words. Most people would have said wild animals. Lost animals. Injured animals. Not valuable. She looked around the cabin. The younger gray wolf she had treated the previous evening quietly leaned against another wolf as though sensing the growing tension. The black wolf stood motionless, yet there was unmistakable authority in the way every other wolf watched him, waiting for the smallest signal. Emma suddenly remembered every strange detail from the night before. The silent discipline, the patient restraint, the way none of them had eaten until the black wolf allowed it, the way they trusted him completely. These were not frightened strays brought together by chance. They belonged together. Outside, Victor Hayes spoke again, his voice remaining calm. "Miss Whitaker, we understand storms lead people to make emotional decisions. You have shown kindness, and we respect that. Simply open the door. We will take the wolves from here, and your involvement will end today." Emma lowered her eyes for a brief moment before looking back toward the black wolf. His wound was cleaner now. His breathing had steadied. Yet his silver eyes held an ancient weariness that no ordinary animal should ever possess. Without fully understanding why, Emma quietly stepped forward until she stood between the front door and the wolves. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "They came here because they needed shelter," she said firmly enough for the men outside to hear. "Until I know they are safe, this door is staying closed." Behind her, the black wolf slowly rose to his full height. And for the first time since the hurricane began, something powerful seemed to awaken in the quiet cabin, as though an invisible crown had just been lifted from the shadows. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Rainwater dripped steadily from the cabin roof, while the quiet forest seemed to hold its breath alongside everyone inside. Emma remained standing in front of the door, her shoulders tense but her chin lifted. She had no plan beyond protecting the frightened animals she had welcomed into her home. Outside, Victor Hayes spoke again, his voice as controlled as before. "Miss Whitaker, you are making this far more complicated than it needs to be. We are not your enemies." Emma closed her eyes for a heartbeat. Something inside his words felt rehearsed, too polished, too carefully measured. If he truly cared about frightened wildlife, he would have asked whether they were injured. He would have asked whether she was safe after surviving the hurricane. Instead, he cared only about taking the wolves away. "Then you will understand why I cannot hand them over to strangers," she replied through the closed door. "They trusted me enough to come here. I will not betray that trust." Silence answered her. Then came the sound of quiet footsteps shifting across the wet porch. Emma instinctively stepped backward, but before she could speak again, the black wolf calmly walked past her and stopped directly in front of the entrance. He stood tall, his silver eyes fixed on the wooden door as though he could see through it. The other 10 wolves quietly formed behind him without a single bark or growl. Their movements were so organized that Emma could only stare in disbelief. This was no random collection of animals. It looked more like loyal companions standing behind the one they had chosen to follow. Outside, Victor lowered his voice. Although Emma could barely hear him, the words carried through the morning air. "He is still inside." Another unfamiliar voice answered, equally quiet. "We cannot force our way in while she is present. That changes everything." Emma frowned. He, not they. Whoever waited outside had not been searching for an entire pack. They had been searching for one particular wolf all along. Her heartbeat quickened as dozens of small moments suddenly connected in her mind. The others waited for the black wolf before eating. They watched him before moving. They rested only after he rested. Even now they stood behind him as though protecting someone they deeply respected. Emma slowly looked at the great black wolf. "They are here because of you," she whispered. The wolf turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. For the first time since he entered the cabin, there was no distance in his gaze. There was gratitude. There was apology. And there was the quiet burden of someone who had carried responsibility for far too long. Emma felt an unexpected calm settle over her. She reached out carefully and rested one hand against the thick fur along his shoulder. "Whatever happened before you found this place," she said softly, "you do not have to face it alone today." The black wolf lowered his head slightly beneath her touch. It was a simple gesture, yet every other wolf immediately relaxed as though her words had eased a tension they all carried. Outside, Victor Hayes released a slow breath. "Miss Whitaker," he called once more, this time without pretending. "Do you have any idea who you are protecting?" Emma looked at the magnificent black wolf standing quietly beside her. His silver eyes reflected the morning light with an almost impossible brilliance. But to her he was still the exhausted soul who had arrived soaked by rain, carrying wounds he had never complained about. She answered with complete honesty. "No," she said. "I only know that kindness should not depend on someone's name." On the other side of the door, no one spoke again, and inside the cabin the black wolf slowly lifted his head, his ancient eyes shining with an emotion no disguise could hide much longer. The silence inside the cabin lingered for several heartbeats after Emma's answer. Outside, no one spoke. Even the forest seemed to wait. Then the black wolf slowly stepped away from the front door and turned to face her completely. His silver eyes never left hers. They no longer carried only quiet gratitude. They carried resolve. Emma felt the warmth in the room change, not because the fire burned brighter, but because something unseen seemed to awaken around him. The other 10 wolves lowered their heads at the exact same moment, not in fear, but in unmistakable respect. Emma looked from one wolf to another, her confusion growing with every passing second. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely hearing her own voice. The black wolf took one slow step forward. A gentle breeze swept through the cabin, although every window remained closed. The flames in the fireplace flickered without smoke, and tiny sparks drifted upward like floating stars. Emma instinctively held her breath. Before her eyes, the massive wolf became surrounded by a soft silver glow that shimmered like moonlight reflecting across calm water. The brilliant light grew brighter for only a moment before quietly fading away. Standing where the great wolf had been was a tall man with dark hair falling to his shoulders, calm silver eyes, and a long charcoal coat that seemed untouched by the storm. A fresh bandage still wrapped his right shoulder exactly where Emma had cleaned the wound only minutes before. His posture carried quiet authority rather than pride, and despite everything that had just happened, the first expression on his face was not triumph. It was sincere gratitude. Emma stared in complete disbelief, unable to find words. The 10 remaining wolves stayed exactly where they were, surrounding the man with silent loyalty. He inclined his head toward her with genuine respect before speaking in a calm, steady voice. "My name is Adrian Blackthorne." Emma repeated the name almost automatically, though it sounded strangely familiar. Then memory rushed through her all at once. Old newspaper. Headlines displayed in grocery stores. Stories exchanged by travelers passing through Hollow Creek. Quiet conversations people lowered their voices to tell. Adrian Blackthorne. The mysterious Lycan King whose territory stretched across forests few ordinary people ever entered. Emma slowly shook her head. "That is not possible," she whispered. Adrian offered the faintest smile. "Most extraordinary things seem impossible until they happen in front of us." Before Emma could answer, a respectful voice called from outside the cabin. "Your Majesty." Victor Hayes no longer sounded confident. He sounded relieved. Adrian glanced toward the door, but did not move immediately. Instead, he turned back to Emma. "The men outside serve my kingdom. They have searched for us since the hurricane separated my companions from our escort." Emma blinked several times, trying to make sense of everything she had witnessed. "You knew who I was this entire time," she said quietly. Adrian slowly nodded. "I knew only that you were willing to risk your own safety for strangers without asking who they were. That is rarer than any title." Emma lowered her eyes, suddenly remembering the towels, the soup, the blankets, and the herbs she had shared so freely. None of it had been offered because she expected anything in return. She had simply seen living creatures needing help. Adrian's silver gaze softened even further. "For one night," he said gently, "you did not treat a king like a king. You treated him like someone worthy of compassion." I will never forget that. As sunlight finally broke through the retreating storm clouds outside, its golden rays filled the little cabin, and for the first time since the hurricane had begun, Emma realized that opening one simple door had quietly changed both of their lives forever. Emma stood quietly as the morning sunlight poured through the cabin windows, washing away the last shadows left behind by the hurricane. Everything around her looked exactly the same. The old wooden table still held empty bowls. Damp towels still hung beside the fireplace. Her grandmother's rocking chair still creaked softly as the fire settled into glowing embers. Yet nothing was truly the same anymore. Adrian Blackthorne walked toward the front door with calm, measured steps before opening it himself. The cool morning air drifted inside, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pine and fresh earth. Outside, Victor Hayes immediately lowered his head. Every person waiting in the yard followed his example without hesitation. No one spoke until Adrian gave a quiet nod. "Your Majesty," Victor said respectfully. "We searched throughout the night." Adrian looked across the muddy clearing before answering. "You searched faithfully." There was no anger in his voice, only quiet appreciation. Then he turned slightly toward the little cabin behind him. "The greatest protection we received did not come from our escort. It came from this home." Every eye shifted toward Emma. She immediately felt uncomfortable beneath the unexpected attention and instinctively folded her hands together. She had never wanted recognition. She had only opened her door because 11 frightened souls needed shelter from a storm. Adrian stepped aside, inviting Emma to stand beside him. She hesitated before slowly walking forward. Victor looked at her with complete astonishment. "Miss Whitaker," he said softly, "very few people have ever earned the personal gratitude of the Lycan King." Emma offered a small, uncertain smile. "I did not know who he was." Adrian looked at her warmly. "That is exactly why your kindness mattered." His words settled over everyone present like the gentle morning light. Titles had never opened Emma's door. Compassion had. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal coat and removed a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon embracing a wolf. The metal reflected the sunrise with quiet brilliance. He carefully placed it into Emma's hand before closing her fingers around it. "In my kingdom," he said, "this symbol is offered only to those under my personal protection and highest trust. Wherever you travel, anyone who recognizes it will know you are family to the Lycan crown." Emma looked down at the pendant, overwhelmed. "I do not know how to thank you." Adrian smiled gently. "You already have, long before either of us knew the others." Name. One by one, the remaining wolves stepped out of the cabin into the fresh morning air. They no longer appeared exhausted. Their strength had returned, yet before disappearing into the forest beside their king, each paused briefly near Emma, offering a quiet glance that felt remarkably close to gratitude. Soon only Adrian remained. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The forest around them sparkled beneath drops of rain hanging from every branch, transformed by sunlight into thousands of tiny crystals. Adrian finally broke the silence. "Storms reveal more than they destroy," he said. "They show us where courage quietly lives." Emma watched him disappear among the towering pines with his companions until the forest swallowed every trace of them. She stood alone once again beside her little cabin, the silver pendant resting warmly in her hand. People in Hollow Creek would eventually hear impossible stories about a hurricane, mysterious wolves, and a forgotten cabin at the edge of Blackbriar Forest. Some would believe them. Others would laugh them away. Emma never argued with either group. Whenever someone asked why she had opened her door to strangers on the darkest night of the year, she simply smiled and answered with the same quiet truth that had guided her heart all along. Kindness is never wasted because you never know whose life you are saving or how deeply they may change your own.